All right, everybody. I'm going to just say this right off the bat. What you are going to watch is going to be shocking on a whole bunch of levels. And folks, it carries a lot of very biblical weight. Jordan Peterson recently testified in front of the House Judiciary Committee regarding the issue of government overreach. Now, that might not make sense when you talk about probably one of the world's smartest clinical psychologists talking about this issue, but when you see the things that he talks about, it will make a lot of sense to you why he was actually called upon to testify. And what we're going to do is going to be really interesting. We're going to do something slightly different, and I am going to play the initial portion of his testimony where he first testifies. Now, you'll go through a little bit of them introducing who's who and so on and so forth. And then Dr. Peterson will provide the testimony that he gives. It's roughly 5 minutes, and I will interrupt it on a very short level, not too many points, and then I'll reserve my commentary for the most part until after he testifies, because I want you to hear the fullness of what he says. And when we talk about Revelation 13, when we talk about the world of the final Antichrist, when we talk about the things that we know are going to be coming in the last days, what you hear Jordan Peterson describe is exactly the kind of infrastructure that we know this coming Antichrist is going to use. This is crazy stuff. So let's take a listen to what Dr. Peterson says. And when you do, look, I'm going to just tell you this right now. I think that it will shock you. Now, there's a lot of you that it won't shock simply because you're very educated and you see, or very educated in this area, and you see a lot of these things happening. But folks, the way he articulates this is just unbelievable. It's remarkable. So take a listen to what Dr. Peterson says. Jim Jordan is going to do kind of like a roll call for some of the people testifying, and then Jordan Peterson is going to talk. I want you to take a good, solid listen to it, and then I'll get into some commentary, especially when we get into the question and answer portion of all of this. And I'm just telling you, just sit back. This is going to be quite the educational process. So let's take a listen at what he says here.
Subcommittee will come to order without objection. Big government was colluding with big tech to censor Americans. That's the first thing we learned. But now it's big government colluding with big banks and big business to spy on everything Americans buy.
Which, by the way, just so that you know, that's in essence what this discussion is. This is big tech, big government, and of course, big banks and the private sector joining in all together to collude in seeking to invade the privacy of citizens. And this is not just a United States issue. This is a worldwide issue, as you're going to find out. So this is why this is so particularly important, especially to the narrative that we read about in Revelation 13. And that's why I just wanted to interrupt it really quickly so that you kind of know the idea of what's being discussed here. We'll get into it. I will probably let this go for close to 4 minutes, maybe a little bit longer than that before I stop it and have a discussion. But I want you to take a listen to it because I want you to take it all in. It's heavy stuff.
Every place they go, everything they do. Big government wants your financial data because it's full of sensitive information about you. Our investigation started when an FBI whistleblower, George Hill, came forward and talked to the committee. Mr. Hill was supervisory intelligence analyst at the FBI up in the Boston field office, told the committee that the FBI got information from Bank of America. Specifically, it received a list of any customer who made purchases in the Washington, D.C. area January 5th through 7th, 2021. The whistleblower's supervisor, special agent in charge of the Boston field office, Mr. Bonavolanta, corroborated Mr. Hill's testimony when he spoke to the committee. And so did Steve Jensen, the FBI's domestic terrorism operations section chief. But it wasn't just purchase data around a specific date that the FBI got from Bank of America. That was actually also overlaid with any firearm purchase at any time. And how did the FBI get this information? They asked for it. In fact, you can see on the display on the screen here the email that was sent. The FBI told Bank of America, to recap our morning call, we are prepared to action immediately the following threshold: customers confirmed as transacting business in Washington, D.C. between these specific dates. So if you're in Washington, D.C., visiting your kids, maybe visiting your aunt, or maybe just a friend, The FBI wanted to know about every single purchase you made. And if you're a gun owner, look out, you're going to the top of the list.
Okay, I will stop it just to tell you, to provide a little bit of clarity. The reason why they did this, of course, was under the direction of Biden's Department of Justice. And the whole idea was, if you even breathed anywhere near Washington in or around the time of January 6th, then they want to look at your record so that they can hold it against you and view you as a conspirator or some type of a domestic terrorist. This is exactly what they are doing. By the way, none of this constitutional, all of this in violation of the Fourth Amendment, amongst many others, by the way. And what they're doing here is so far overreaching that it would have been unthinkable even 10 years ago, right? Certainly would have been unthinkable prior to the Patriot Act. So this is some very important stuff, because if they can do it in America, they're doing it everywhere else. And if they can do it everywhere else, we are rapidly approaching the world of the final Antichrist that we read about in the book of Revelation 13. And we're here. We're literally approaching that time. The infrastructure is in place, and we're beginning to see examples of people using it in real life. And that's why I think this is a really important discussion.
For simply exercising your Second Amendment right, you're on the FBI's target list. And never forget, the federal government got this information without any process. No warrant, and frankly, no notification. The bank didn't tell the customer that we're handing this information over to the FBI, the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world. Now, these FBI agents, Mr. Hill, Mr. Bonavolante, Mr. Jensen, they all said this was wrong, and in fact sent the information back to FBI headquarters in DC. So that's how our investigation began. But since then, and we continue to investigate, but since then, we've learned that the financial surveillance was broader, and there was actually a specific objective. The federal government is building profiles on the American people. And the profile isn't based on criminal conduct, it's based on political beliefs. And if you got the wrong political beliefs, well, you're potentially a domestic violent extremist. We now introduce today's witnesses. Dr. Jordan Peterson is a psychologist, author, and professor emeritus at the University of Toronto. He previously taught at Harvard University and McGill University. He has published more than 100 scientific papers, hosts a popular podcast, hosts public lectures across the United States, Canada, Australia, and Europe, and offers online programs to help consumers better understand their personalities and themselves. Dr. Peterson has been targeted for his views on the importance of free speech and traditional values, and has warned of the dangers of debanking political opponents, as he has seen in Canada. We'll begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you. And we will start with Dr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Now I want you to take some time and really concentrate on what he says, because it's uniquely profound, okay? Please take some time. This is why I'm not going to interrupt it until we get to one certain point. I want you to take in the overwhelming majority of what he says. I will provide commentary on some of this stuff as soon as he's finished, but I just need you to really, really, really take in what Dr. Peterson is about to say, because this is pretty significant stuff. And if you haven't gotten it already, I do have a lot of respect for Jordan Peterson. I think that he's a pretty brilliant man who is always in search for the truth, and his honesty has gotten him in trouble, and trouble that he didn't deserve. So let's take a listen to what he has to say here.
Thank you again for being here.
As well, I would like to start by expressing my appreciation for the privilege awarded to me to testify here today. It really is an honor to be asked to do so. I'm not here to talk about January 6th or about any particular threat, insurrection, or protest, political or ideological, real or imaginary. I'm here to talk about the already extant and expanding collusion of government and corporation in restricting the individual freedom and autonomy upon which the productive, generous, and stable psyche, economy, and state are themselves necessarily founded. I'll begin my comments, therefore, in the most general terms to shed light on the mounting problem. There are now 700 million CCTVs in China under the rule of the Communist Party. The system to which those electronic eyes are attached is the most complete state apparatus of surveillance yet imagined, with the ability not only to recognize faces at a distance, but gait itself when facial features are hidden or obscured. Such capability can and will soon be augmented to the point where the movement of eyes themselves, monitored by high-resolution and intelligent cameras, will soon be sufficient to identify any aware and active party. The demented, naive, and prideful engineers who so enthusiastically helped build this system call it Skynet, after the rogue and all-seeing technology that took such a dreadfully wrong turn in the famous science fiction movie Terminator series, featuring artificially intelligent robot intelligences hell-bent on protecting themselves by destroying humanity. The name also references a well-known Chinese phrase describing the reach of the divine itself. The net of heaven is vast, yet it misses nothing, which aptly describes the capabilities of the new state apparatus. The system is integrated with the so-called Chinese social credit system, which awards its involuntary participants with a score indicating their compliance with the dictates of the Chinese Communist Party, allowing for full control over access to everything they possess electronically. Most ominously, their savings and their access to travel. Certainly all modern means of travel, but increasingly as the electronic gates come up, even by walking. If you're Chinese or a visitor, your access to the world can be reduced to zero if your social credit score falls beyond an arbitrary minimum. This allows you purposefully to be shut out of all activities that can be virtualized. And in a rapidly virtualizing world, this increasingly means all activities: driving, shopping, working, eating, finding shelter, even fraternizing with friends and family, as merely being in the presence of someone with a low social credit score means that your own score can be lowered. This has also opened up the opportunity for the government to extract slave-like labor from its citizens, so burdened, as the donation of free work to the state still constitute one means by which erring Chinese men and women can increase their score and remain part of human society. This is precisely the payment system most desired by the most tyrannical, not the work for me and benefit thereby that constitutes the contractual arrangement undertaken by free and sovereign citizens, but the work for me and I will lift the deprivation I imposed that has always been the leitmotif of the slaver. Why is any of this relevant to people in the West? Well, because the technology that the Chinese Communist Party employs is an extension of Western technology. Because we already fell prey to the terrible temptation of lockdown employed by that state in the face of hypothetical crisis once and in the very recent past, because we're walking step by step in the same direction, partly because of the hypothetical convenience of universal and automatic recognition of identity, and partly because any problem whatsoever that now confronts us can easily be used to justify the increasing reach of the security and nanny state. It is said that Stone Age people, first confronted with cameras and their resultant photographs by modern anthropologists, objected to having their images captured as they feared the captivity of their souls. It turns out that such fear was prescient. The images that we leave behind while navigating virtual space are such close duplicates of our actual selves that the capture of our essence is at this point all but guaranteed. We all now have our doppelgangers. We all live so much in the virtual world in consequence of our purchasing habits and modes of electronically mediated communication that our very selves have become reducible to a frightening degree to data, the modern equivalent of our footprint, with the same data making up an image of our identity, an identity which can be and is increasingly bought and sold by the invisible corporate brokers that still mostly use it to sell us what we so desperately and carelessly and conveniently want, but that can also be used to track, monitor, and punish everything we do and say. Behavioral scientists facilitate this process with their reprehensible nudging, the practice of pushing people in a given ideologically determined direction by manipulating invisible incentives behind the scene. Corporations track purchasing decisions, developing algorithms that with increasing accuracy track our patterns of attention and action, allowing for the prediction of what might next be most enticing, doing so not only to offer us what we want, but to determine and shape what we need. Governments can and are colluding with these corporate agents to develop a picture not only of our actions, but of our thoughts and words, so that deviation from the desired end can be mapped, rewarded, and punished. The development of a digital identity and currency is nothing more than the likely end consequence of such inclinations, and the combination of both can and will facilitate the development of a surveillance state, the scope of which optimistic pessimists of totalitarianism such as George Orwell could scarcely imagine. The new AI systems, which are so rapidly emerging, do nothing but increase this danger, providing for the possibility of a super surveillance whose scope exceeds anything that mere unaugmented humans could imagine, while also making it certain that even the perceptions that in the real world shape our attitudes, conduct, and personality can be manipulated to the degree that we will not even be able to see a reality outside which that has been constructed by the superstate, the ultimate fascist collusion between gigantic self-interested corporations and paranoid, security-obsessed anti-human governments. We're already selling our souls to the superstate for the purposes of immediate gratification, while being enticed to do so by
Mr. Chairman, could the
ideologues.
witness be asked to summarize, please?
I think it's just ridiculous right now that he's being interrupted by somebody in the House. This was the point that I said I was going to stop. I don't know if you have been listening as intently as I've been listening, but Dr. Peterson has just laid out one of the most ugly and ominous pictures that I have heard coming out of anybody's mouth regarding this issue, this problem that's in front of us, this issue that's at hand. We have been talking about this issue, folks. This is not something that's strange to us. We have said that this was not just coming, that it was here. And now you've got a congressman who won't even respect the time allotted to Dr. Peterson. And already as it is, I don't know if you noticed when he first started his address, he was very distraught. Like you could see it. He understands the weight of what he's communicating. I'm going to talk about this in just a minute. But to see how rude this congressman is, the fact that he absolutely hates this man, it's very, very obvious. It's ridiculous. And you'll actually see how venomous this person is a little bit later. It's unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's reprehensible. And there is no reason why it should be happening like this. It's absolutely crazy, right? But there we go. It's kind of how it works. But watch this for just a second, because I think that Dr. Peterson answers this quite well. I think he does very, very well in just basically saying, hey, do I have 5 minutes or do I not have 5 minutes? And then he goes on and he finishes what he was supposed to finish. And they can't be upset if he goes over a couple of seconds because he was interrupted. And not only was he interrupted, but it's hard to get the flow back of what you're actually communicating if you do this. And I think that what this congressman was doing, who's an agent of the spirit of Antichrist, certainly men like him will be used by the Antichrist one day, right? He was seeking to disrupt the flow of continuity with respect to the verbal representations being made by Dr. Peterson. He did not want Dr. Peterson's words to be shared with the kind of fluidity that creates the most, impressive impact. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. It's obscene. It's obscene. It's ridiculous. Okay? But that's what's happening. I mean, I'm at a loss for words. I'm a little mad watching it, but what are you going to do? I'm glad because I know that Dr. Peterson has the presence of mind to be able to carry these concepts all the way through and not allow these knuckleheads to try to interfere with what he's doing. So let's go right back to Dr. Peterson.
And do I have my 5 minutes or do I not?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can certainly.
If the witness could summarize, we're always a little lenient with the time. If you could
I'll
summarize.
take 10 more seconds.
Sure.
With increasing ability to monitor not only the actual attention patterns and behaviors of its citizens, but to predict those that are most likely, the persecution of even potential crime becomes ever more likely. If you have nothing to hide, you will have nothing to fear.
By the way, the potential crime, the prosecution of potential crime, meaning they look at your activity and then they make a decision. Is he likely to commit the crime? If he is, then we're gonna prosecute him. That's what Dr. Peterson's talking about here. It's about to get worse. If you haven't paid attention to any of what he said, pay attention to what he says in this last 30 or 40 seconds.
Here will be the slogan commandeered by those most likely to turn to surveillance to protect and control. What was the famous Soviet totalitarian joke attributed to Lavrenti Beria, head of the secret police? Show me the man and I'll show you the crime. Those words were true enough in the time of Stalin's KGB, and the police were secret enough then as well. But that's nothing compared to what we can and likely will produce now. A police so secret that we will not even be able to detect their comprehensive and subtle activity. Monitoring crime so pervasive that everyone under the dictates of the system will have something to hide
Regular
and
order,
much to
Mr.
fear.
Chairman.
We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. Dr. Peterson, do you?
I think it's kind of ridiculous how they try to shut him up and they don't want anything to come out of his mouth. I want to talk about a few points that he brought up before we go into the questions that comes up, because I think it's remarkable. He draws a parallel with the Chinese Communist Party, and he talks about this movement of eyes identification, and this is a big deal. They have cameras right now that have the ability to examine the movement in your eyes to make very accurate assertions as into what you might be anticipating. In other words, if you look to the left, it's very likely you're going to move to the left. If something's coming at you and you look in a specific direction, it's obvious that you're seeking to avoid what might be coming as a result of what you see happening in front of you. This is a mechanism for control. And he talks about Skynet. I want you to pay attention to the Skynet thing. And we'll talk about Skynet a little bit later. That'll be a discussion we have in another video. But he talks about their statement about Skynet, right? That it is the net of heaven is vast, yet it misses nothing. So this is the spirit of Antichrist. This is them assuming the role of God, and in their assumption of the role of God, they are removing the consciousness of God from the people that they are seeking to control. That's what they're doing. And it comes from the Terminator movie, but it's way worse than anything you would have seen in the Terminator movie, right? Because it brings us to the control of a social credit system. If you don't fall into place with the things that we ask you to do, then in essence, what we're going to do is we are going to give you consequences. I'll give you an example of something like this that could manifest itself in the near future. If you don't take this mark on your forehead or on your right hand, then there will be this consequence. You won't be able to travel. You won't be able to go anywhere. You won't be able to do anything, right? You can't be with your friends and your family. If your friends and your family are with you and they know that you're in trouble and they don't identify you, then they're going to lose all their freedoms, all their privileges, right? So the idea is they will ask you to participate in their tyranny. And if you do, you turn in your family, you do the things that they want you to do, you will be rewarded for that, right? It's an extension of Western tech. That's something that he brought up. Like the technology that we have deployed here in the United States of America and all over the West is literally being extended into these types of uses, whether it be on the domestic level, whether it be international level for spying, all of that kind of stuff. And the kind of things that they're doing with data, just from simple things like your purchases in the banks. Guys, what they're talking about here is something that we have been talking about for a long time. This is a silent military that is overtaking you. This is a silent group of people that are completely going to take your life over, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. So let's get into some of these questions. I'll comment after some of these questions are asked, but it's pretty heavy to see this type of thing taking place. And again, this is Revelation chapter 13. Guys, I'm telling you, if you cannot see it, it's Revelation chapter 13. As a matter of fact, after one of the questions that get asked, I am actually going to read a section of Revelation 13 to kind of get you acclimated to what it actually says, because it is so important that you understand this, right? It is super, 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 super important, okay? All right, so let's get back into this.
Do you think they're just going to stop with conservatives? I mean, my history tells us that the cancel culture mob, the surveillance state, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't just, they never are satisfied with just certain people. It always expands. And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, Senator Feinstein, iconic Democrat senator from the great state of California, The folks in San Francisco renamed the Dianne Feinstein Elementary School. They took her name off the school because they found that she said something like 40 years ago that the cancel culture mob didn't like. So even a liberal Democrat senator wasn't good enough for the mob. They came after her too. And this is the thing that scares me. We've invited probably more Democrat witnesses in front of this committee than any other committee, because we invite Democrats to come in and say we respect the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment, respect the Constitution. My concern is it never just stops with certain people. It always goes further. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and before you answer the question, I want to say this. For those people that identify with cancel culture and stand in the position of the left, fine, that's fine, but they're coming for you first. So think about this. These pastors that are standing with these, George Floyd marchers and, walking into the, woke industrial complex and kind of falling in with the Ed Stetzers and the Andy Stanleys of the world. I'm telling you right now, you guys are going to be the first they go after. Because we even see this in the book of Revelation, right? It's like the whore that rides the beast gets used by the Antichrist. The system gets used by the Antichrist. And then what does he do? He destroys them all. And he starts with them first. Then he goes after the people of God. And it's like, we should just know this. This is how this system works. This is tyranny. And in its finest place, this is what it does. And this is, Revelation chapter 6 material. This is the rider of the white horse doing what he does, right? This final Antichrist who brings in war, which is the rider of the red horse, which brings in economic failure, which is the rider of the black horse, which brings in death, the rider of the pale horse. We see these things. It's very obvious. It's in front of our face. It's happening right now before us. We're watching the foundation being laid, right? The theater curtains are ready to open up to create the condition that we know is going to take place after we get raptured. The time is coming up sooner than later. It's that simple.
Well, the reason I prefaced my remarks with an insistence on nonpartisanship is because the danger posed by this increasing ability of governments and large corporations to collude threatens everyone's freedom equally. And it could well be that at the moment, and this is, I think, the case the Republicans here are trying to make, is that the people who are in the sights of that collusion tend to have more conservative leanings, but that will shift in a moment whenever the political tides shift. And we're concentrating in this hearing a fair bit on the specific events of January 6th, a very partisan issue that produces a very intense partisan divide, but we're not addressing the fundamental issue here directly, which is that our new technology enables a mode of surveillance that's so intense and all-pervading that no one will escape its purview regardless of their political views.
I think this is the thing that's like really, really important, right? Because we have to understand this. January 6th is nothing compared to the bigger issue created by the whole tech thing, right? January 6th is one issue that relates to a whole bunch of government overreach where a lot of evil things were done. But the reality of it is what we're talking about is much more broadly scoped. It affects a whole lot more. This is Orwell, right? This is way worse than Orwell ever was. He just mentioned that, right? Like if you think that the stuff that Orwell wrote about, oh, that's so Orwellian. This is beyond Orwellian, right? This is apocalyptic. This is Revelation stuff that we're talking about here. And it's very, very real stuff. This is the modern day Tower of Babel that we're watching. And it's funny to see the kind of just nefarious intent that exists within these hard leftists, because they're all believing in the revolution, but they don't realize they're going to be the first people that these totalitarian rulers go after. I said totalitarian. I don't know. I just pulled a Joe Biden. These totalitarian rulers are going to go after. That's what's going to happen. And I think that this is very difficult for people to be able to grasp. This is a very, very serious issue, and there's a whole lot of overreach here. And I think that's what Jordan Peterson's trying to explain.
There are Republicans and Democrats who want to roll back the Patriot Act. What a beautiful name, but it's being used to violate American citizens' rights to privacy. We have one of the rarest things possible. You have Mr. Jordan and Mr. Nadler in complete agreement on how to reform the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And frankly, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act part works pretty well. It's the Domestic Surveillance Act. Well, there isn't one, because the Fourth Amendment guards it. It says you're supposed to get a warrant.
Okay, so I want to just explain this. When we talk about FISA, there's been a lot of debate as into how that works, right? Jerry Nadler is not a good guy in my opinion. I think he's just broken on a whole bunch of levels, and he's a complete mess. And when you start looking at the views of Jim Jordan, I really admire Jim Jordan's views on a lot of issues. I think that he does well. So it was pretty rare that the both of them would sit down and agree on how the FISA court works. Their disagreement, which I think is a very powerful one, and the one that is the most important, is what ends up happening on the domestic front. Because how do you apply the FISA principles to American citizens? You don't. There is a Fourth Amendment issue. There is a Fifth Amendment issue, a First and Second Amendment issue. All of these things work hand in hand to establish the freedoms that we have, and this is such a remarkably important, significant, and very powerful context you have to look at things in. The issue here isn't what we're doing with foreign intelligence. The issue here is what we're doing with domestic intelligence. You can't spy on United States citizens. They did it to Trump. If they could do it to Trump, they've definitely done it to you. Okay? That's the issue here. And that's a big deal. If countries begin to buy into domestic intelligence, as they're calling it, the formula for Revelation 13 is already there. It's done. It's a done deal. We're here. We're already there. Watch this.
And we're covering a giant hole here, not about January 6th. What about the Bank Secrecy Act and third-party doctrine? Things that are being abused, weaponized against the citizens of this country. Now, they don't have all these same safeguards in Canada, and Dr. Peterson, you've experienced some of the consequences of not having the safeguards that we have in this country. I wonder if you could elaborate on how consequential it is to have the safeguards we do have here on privacy and speech.
Well, I know that my colleagues on the psychological front and on the medical front in Canada are increasingly frightened of making any of their political opinions known in any form whatsoever, because governmental agencies, usually of the mid-level bureaucratic sort, have been empowered as a consequence of our lack of First Amendment rights to intervene as they see fit in relationship to stated opinion, political or otherwise. And it's not good. It's seriously not good. And there's new legislation coming up also reflecting that lack of proper constitutional protection that will make even the suspicion that a crime may be committed punishable. That's Bill C-63.
I'm just saying, in a fundamental sense, do you think there should be a warrant requirement before some financial institution hands over the name of the customer based on certain purchases they may have made?
Watch how many people actually say a warrant isn't necessary in some cases. Or at least there is not an absolutism in their answer to this, right? This is so amazing. It's crazy because they're opening up a door even for them to be shot to the ground. It's just terrible. Watch this.
So in a general sense,
Yes.
you think there should be?
Yes.
That's great, because your colleagues don't think so. Now, let me go to this. Do you think, Mr. Michel, that if it can't do a warrant, do you think there should be at least a notification? So should at least the bank say, hey, Mr. Smith, the FBI just asked me for all your purchases on a certain date, and they want to know if you've ever bought a gun. Do you think that the bank should at least tell their customer who they're supposed to serve? Do you think they should at least be compelled to tell them that?
Yes.
Mr. Tedesco?
Yes.
Mr. Knight?
Yes, with reasonable exceptions for an ongoing criminal case.
Fair enough. Mr. Peterson?
They should get a warrant.
Let's get a warrant. Back to the first thing. Mr. Falone?
Again, with exceptions for criminal investigations.
We got agreement on the panel. The first time we've had that this morning. Dr. Peterson, I want you to talk about the debanking issue we saw so much of, and how that was, particularly I guess with the truckers, and how that's, because I see it coming. I see it coming here, and it frightens me. I want you to talk about what took place in Canada and if it in any way impacted you.
Pay attention, by the way, to what he says happened in Canada, okay? Because for those of you that don't know, just so you have an idea, there were a bunch of truckers that protested what the leadership in Canada was doing, and it was specifically terrible what was happening. And so they decided to protest by not delivering and to staying in certain areas, doing what every other person has been allowed to do. And so what has happened is the leadership of Canada got their information from the banks, froze their assets, and kept them from being able to basically live. That's exactly what they did. Super wicked, total Antichrist thing. Total Revelation 13 thing. And I'm going to read that to you in just a second before we close off on this video. But listen to his answer on this because it's quite profound.
Well, there was essentially a working class protest against the extensive length of the COVID lockdowns. And one consequence of that was that Canadians who participated, even by donating to the protest and even by donating small amounts to the protest, had their bank accounts seized in consequence of a collusion between the banks and the government that was extrajudicial, that was recently deemed unconstitutional, despite the fact that we don't have strong First Amendment claims. So this happened. The government is currently maneuvering in Canada to make the possibility of such collusion a certainty across multiple actual and potential domains of so-called harm, particularly in relationship to government-defined hate. Yes, this is absolutely coming, and it's facilitated by the kinds of advancements in technology that we talked about today.
Yeah, we know it's coming because we've seen what do they call it? The liaison information report from the FBI to the bank saying possibly include firearm legislation, the easing of immigration status, new limits on public land, and discontent with renewed measures to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. So the very issue that these truckers were debanked in Canada is the very thing the government is saying to banks, we need to look at this as well. That single issue. That is, again, what frightens me so much.
Who would you consider to be the biggest victims of this surveillance operation?
I think it's the American citizens, and I think it's a bipartisan issue. Some of the Democrats in this chamber and in the Senate sent letters to the big banks just a few weeks ago talking about de-risking. They call debanking de-risking. We're talking about the same thing of Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, including because of their religious donations and donations to charity. So it's a bipartisan issue, and I think we all should be concerned about it and try to work together for solutions.
No, I 100% agree with you. And you know, what do you think right now under the BSA, under the current structure, what is the remedy for Americans?
Well, there isn't much.
There is none, right? There is no mechanism for judicial review, right? So Americans cannot protest a bank who is ostensibly an arm of the government at this point. They cannot protest the disclosure of their financial transactions to the federal government. There's no mechanism for that, is there?
That's right.
You understand how serious that is, right? In other words, if the United States of America already has the means for serious and radical totalitarian rule, then every country outside of America is already doing the same thing. I cannot emphasize enough how close we're getting to the world of the final Antichrist. Like, guys, this is serious stuff. Really serious stuff, okay? Take a listen to what he goes on to say.
And so, and obviously, they don't have any knowledge that their data was collected to begin with, do they?
Yeah, I think one of the scariest things I heard at this hearing was what Mr. Michel said, once the bank has the data, the government has the data.
Right. Can you hire a private security firm to search somebody's house without a warrant?
I don't think so, no.
No, you have to have a warrant. So what is the difference here?
It's a big risk, and it needs to be fixed.
So and you would articulate, let me ask you the panel this, do you think that under the current BSA or other laws that it would be wise, given where we are from a technological standpoint, do you think it would be wise to revisit the BSA or the other laws to provide that protection for Americans' privacy?
You think?
Well, there were some concerns expressed earlier about what might happen in the aftermath, let's say, of Donald Trump's election with regards to political belief, and anything that facilitates the collusion between government and giant corporation and enables that kind of information gathering will absolutely be used in that way. That's why I made comments earlier regarding this as a bipartisan issue. Once this capability exists, and it's being magnified now, it will be used in all directions. So the people at risk will be politically active, vocal Americans. The silent ones will remain relatively safe. But anyone who speaks.
And briefly, do y'all think that we should examine?
So let me give you an interpretation for this. Christians will be the first targets The ones who are speaking out loud about the wrongs that are being done within the context of the political infrastructure, they're the ones that are going to be persecuted. And if you have a pastor or a spiritual leader that tells you that you have no business getting into politics, they are wrong. And this is the reason why they are wrong, folks. Okay? They are wrong. You are going to lose all of your freedoms in this country if you don't speak out against the nonsense that you're seeing here. God calls us to get involved in all of these things. Jesus was about as political as they got, folks. Okay? He spoke against political power every day. It's critical. I think we should talk about this. It's really, really critical. Look what he goes on to say.
Amen.
We should absolutely examine it.
Agree.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
Gentleman's time has expired. The
Excuse me,
gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I have a point of order. In your last statement, you said that Steve Jensen of the FBI opposed the collection of this information for banks. That's a misrepresentation of his testimony.
Not an appropriate point of
Jensen
order.
said
The
that the
gentlelady from
information was
Florida
not
is
used.
recognized
Would you
for 5
release the
minutes.
transcript so that we can hear
Not an
exactly
appropriate-
what
it's
Mr. Jensen
Not an appropriate
said?
point of order. And the
So just so you know, the reason why it's not an appropriate point of order is because she's asking to have a classified transcript released regarding a statement that she claims was made out of context by one of the FBI whistleblowers. And the statement was very likely not held out of context, but she's throwing it in as a point of order to create some confusion in the proceedings, to interrupt or to try to keep the main gist of what's being communicated in this. She's covering up for all of these government people that are seeking to destroy our freedoms. So you can see it. It's very obvious. The problem, the thing she doesn't realize is they're coming after her first, right? She doesn't get that. But that's what we're seeing here. It's really, really ugly, folks. It's ugly. It's ugly.
gentlelady knows that, but she continues to try to ask
Same way you
a
do.
question that is
Same
not a
way
point of-
you interject.
I don't think
sir.
I've raised one.
She says, same way you interject, but Jordan Peterson is the chairman. He's the head of the Judiciary Committee. He reserves the right to be able to do this, especially in commenting on what's a point of order and what isn't. If you know the committee rules, it's very obvious that Jordan Peterson, or that Jim Peterson is, or Jim Jordan. Oh my goodness, I'll get it right. 3 strikes and I'm out. That Jim Jordan is right on this. He's not out of order. He's the one that calls what is out of order when somebody calls for a point of order. It's just ridiculous. But she's using some of the rules that exist within the context of congressional or committee rules. She's trying to basically clear the clarity, put mud back where the clarity has been created concerning this issue because she's bought and paid for. That's what it is. Spirit of Antichrist is alive and well, ladies and gentlemen.
Point of order today.
You interject all the
The
time.
gentlelady from
sir.
Florida is recognized.
All the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm actually I continue to be stunned by the big government advocates that we come across and the ones that serve in this very chamber. They're not even hiding it anymore. They're saying the quiet part out loud. They want dependency, they want control. And the total disregard for the Constitution and the oath that many of my colleagues, actually all of my colleagues, have taken and violated, it's so disturbing to me. Many people know, probably as evidenced by what is on the face of my iPad, that I detest big government and I detest big tech. The two combined have proven to be a lethal combination when it comes to liberty and freedom. Because quite frankly, we know that the MO of...
By the way, for those of you that don't know, if you see that thing that says "Don't tread on me," it's that American people, you'll see that in a flag, you'll see that as a post, it's a statement. In essence, the "Don't tread on me" statement is probably one of the most patriotic expressions right now that we see in artistic form. And it was something that goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War. So it's a very interesting thing. If you see someone with that "Don't tread on me" sticker or a flag, chances are they're a hardcore patriot. I can tell you that right now. They're one of us. I'm just telling you that. It's just my thought. Just my thought. Here we go.
big tech and big financial institutions combined with big government, it's to erode and evade Americans' constitutional rights. And we're here today because of a blatant Fourth Amendment violation, where big banks colluded with big government to turn over data that didn't belong to them to target Americans, innocent Americans. Because in this country, it is still a fact that you are innocent until proven guilty, despite what everyone is trying to do and flip that around. Now, Dr. Peterson, It's good to see you again. I couldn't help but notice your reaction when my colleague was talking about the First Amendment not being absolute. And so I do want to give you the opportunity to weigh in and respond to that. I couldn't help but notice your reaction. But before I do, I am really glad that you have been talking about the social credit system that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, utilizes. I am literally around the corner in a classified briefing right now talking about the use of big tech and how it is targeting American citizens. In fact, this very morning, I have been inundated in my office with phone calls from TikTok users who have been denied access to the app because they live in my congressional district, and until they call my office and demand that I do not take adverse action against the app, that they cannot use it. Talk about big tech directing behavior. I think that we are on a very dangerous path, and I want to give you my time to really lay out in the most succinct way possible the dangerous nexus of big tech, big government, and financial institutions that seek to weaponize that information against Americans. And I know you are more than capable of doing that in 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
And when you listen to this, by the way, after you do, I'm going to read you a passage in the book of Revelation. And this is all going to come very, very clear. And by the way, I do admire her approach here because she's right. She's very right. Listen to Jordan Peterson's answer. When that answer concludes, then I'm going to read this passage in the book of Revelation, and we'll sort of put a biblical summary around this for you because it's very, very important that we talk about this.
I don't think people understand the degree to which they are profiled online and to which their virtual representation is now an iconic representation of them, nor do they understand that they have no rights whatsoever to that representation. So for example, let's say we turn our information about our purchasing habits over to the bank when we open a bank account. 30 years ago, that wasn't such a big problem. With AI systems, it's a problem that's so big you can't imagine it. I mean, I'm certain that my staff could find the data online to absolutely predict your voting patterns with 95% accuracy. You have no idea what sort of digital footprint that you're leaving behind you, and there are almost no protections for that. And so now, and you also asked about the First Amendment.
Yes.
Well, we have very weak free speech protections in Canada, and I can tell you that is not going well. And so the combination in my country, the combination of that and the invasive technology that we're producing at a rate that beggars the imagination, produces a threat to the integrity of sovereign citizenship, the likes of which has not yet been experienced. Right? And that's what this committee should be concentrating on. Like, it's very interesting to watch it because it devolves continually into discussion of a particular event, serious though that event was. It's like, no matter how serious that event was, it pales in comparison to the potential severity of the issue that we're attempting to point to with regards to our testimony. These artificially intelligent systems can do things you can't imagine. And not only can they are and they will. And that will be abetted by the collusion between large corporations and government. And it's certainly the case that the people who stand on the left, especially with regards to their, what would you say, skepticism of large corporations, which is often perfectly warranted, should be utterly terrified about this.
Man, you did that in less time than I thought.
Well, I had to get it right once today.
No, I appreciate that. And I think you have seen it front and center. Certainly, we all watched in horror as the truckers' bank accounts were seized, were shut down, who protested the mandates. And people think that that's such a faraway concept, but we have seen that here with people who have been given ultimatums of jab or job, and we've seen ways that they've been targeted and positioned in ways that are just un-American, unconstitutional. So thank you all to our witnesses for being here today.
I want to just say this because I think it's really important, and I'm going to just take a moment to read this to you because it's critical. It speaks of a future happening that we know is around the corner. We won't be on this earth when it happens, but we're seeing the infrastructure develop for it to happen. Let me read this to you. This is verse 15 of Revelation chapter 13. It says, this is talking about the beast, when we talk about the beast, the Antichrist, and we're talking about the other beast that we read about here, this false prophet. And this is what it's talking about in terms of the collusion between these two. But it says this in verse 15, it says, and he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. We know this is coming. And what's really scary about this is the infrastructure necessary in order for this Antichrist to enforce the rule of accepting the mark will already be in place. It is falling into place right now, ladies and gentlemen. We're already there. It's happening. As a matter of fact, in Revelation chapter 14, we seem to get the implication that people are going to be running in line to take the mark of the beast, to the point where an angel is going to be begging them and saying, please, don't take the mark. Don't take the mark. We're going to talk about that, by the way, Sunday morning service on the Calvary Chapel Signal Hill Live webpage. The thing that's really amazing about all of this is how quickly south things are going. The type of things that we're seeing today, Americans would have never tolerated 15 years ago. They wouldn't have tolerated it 30 years ago. They wouldn't have tolerated it in some cases even 5 years ago. But things are changing so dramatically, and people, for the sake of comfort. I mean, can you imagine a Chinese-owned social media business is actually demanding that the people who consume their product in a specific district go and tell somebody that they can't do what they're doing and will stop service to these people? Look, if I'm an American and I live in that area and I don't have TikTok, which I don't use TikTok at all, but I don't have TikTok, I would tell them to go shove it. You want to control me so I can use your consumer product? You're not a crack dealer, and I'm not a crackhead. I'm sorry. But this is the world that we're headed towards. Folks, the spirit of Antichrist is alive and well. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. This is why the study of Bible prophecy is so important. And this is why it's important for pastors to teach Bible prophecy. Folks, this stuff is real. It's critical and it's important. Time to keep your eyes on the Lord. It's that simple. Time to study the Word. Study Bible prophecy. Get into this stuff, folks. It's critical. God bless you.